The classic novel, maybe some of you have read it, The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It pictures two possibilities concerning the morality of humanity amid a tumultuous time of the French Revolution. Somebody who appears to be disreputable becomes righteous, while someone who appears to seek justice becomes bloodthirsty in the end. The novel, among other things, pits redemption, nobility, and goodness against self-pursuit, wickedness, and death. One of the main morals, then, of the book deals with the path that a person will choose when faced with the terrors of an event like the French Revolution, where members of all social classes, including women and children, are violently killed. As the Tale of Two Cities addresses individual choices, Augustine's book, The City of God, places those choices in light of the contrast that exists between the city of man and the city of God. In the landscape of these contrasting cities, he indicates that our choices center on either the tumult of man or the triumph of the Lamb, on either the glory of self or the glory of God. Pride, Augustine says, is the beginning of sin. And what is pride but the craving for undue exaltation? And this, he says, is undue exaltation, when the soul abandons God, to whom it ought to cleave as its end, and becomes instead a kind of end to itself. Augustine bases his lengthy philosophical treatise on Psalm 87, the main idea being how God has established a city for the eternal hub of his worship and the habitation of his children. So we will live for the coming eternity, or we will live for this current earth. Which city will you choose? The heavenly city or the earthly one? In light of the coming apocalypse, Revelation 17 shows that we need to avoid the lures of the city of man. One of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries." Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, one is, the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain for only a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an eighth king. He belongs to the seven and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Revelation chapter 17 begins another key section of this biblical book as we see in verse 3 that John is carried away yet again in the Spirit. This section enables John to provide a fuller interpretation of the closing days of history that lead into the new creation. We certainly know how the story ends. The church is fighting a battle that's already been won. Chapters 17 and 19 describe the judgment enacted on the world in order to set God's people free to worship apart from all idols. This worship ensues in the 1,000-year millennial kingdom in chapter 20, which I believe is the initial phase of the new creation, and it carries into the finalized eternal home of chapter 21, 1 through 8. At chapter 21, verse 9, John will be called up again in the Spirit. Revelation is a worship book. It seeks to move our eyes away from the whoring of this world and onto the ways of our God. We need to look away from the idols of the world that lead to decadence and degradation. Verse 1 says that Babylon, which stands for the city of man, sits upon many waters. Verse 15 reveals the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. In Genesis 11, verse 2, people moved eastward to the plain of Shinar. And at this location, they determined in their hearts to build a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that they could make a name for themselves. That tower is known as Babel, from which Babylon comes. The motivation for constructing such a tower extended from sinful humanity's desire for self-glory. Babel represented a defiant spirit against the person of God. And so the Lord brings judgment. He divides the people of the past. He divides the people of John's present. He divides people into the future. It's what you might call the tumult of man. The spirit of Babel will sit upon many waters, now divided across all multitudes, all nations, all languages. Babylon is what 1 John 2:16 describes as stirring up the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the lust of pride. Babylon leads to a way of corrupted political ideologies. Babylon leads to confused human pursuits. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. Now, we might quickly rifle off an extensive list of abominations that have riddled societies, whether capitalist or communist, whether rich or poor. Let me address but a few. The 5 nations currently listed for having the highest rate of drug abuse and addiction problems with substances like heroin and crystal meth are in the following order: Iran, Afghanistan, Russia, the United States, and Great Britain. Various reasons exist for such addiction, ranging from decades of violence and war to a sense of hopelessness, to social mores that promote dangerous experimentation. That's an abomination. Russell Brand says the priority of any addict is to numb the pain of living, to ease the passage of each day with some purchased relief. Nevertheless, I believe we can apply the angel's voice in Revelation 17:14 for how it pertains to drugs and other illicit substances. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Only the Lamb can triumph over this tumult of man. Presently, the abortion rate of pregnancies for babies diagnosed with Down syndrome is approximately 100% in Iceland and Denmark. It's 90% in Australia and the UK. It's about 80% in the United States. That's an abomination. Lila Rose says, our world is being stripped of love, joy, and beauty. This lethal discrimination must end. And we can say with confidence that it will come to an end because of the words found in Revelation 17, verse 14. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Only the Lamb can triumph over the tumult of man. Worldwide, nearly 50 million people are impacted by human trafficking on a yearly basis. Of that number, 1 in 4 is a child. That amounts to over 12 million children, with about 87% of them being sexually exploited through commercial sex trade. Human trafficking can be incredibly difficult to detect. It often goes unreported, meaning that these numbers that I just cited probably only represent a portion of the human trafficking that takes place in our world. That's an abomination. Tim Tebow says, I don't know if we'll ever win the war against human trafficking and child exploitation in this lifetime, but I know who wins one day. And until that day comes, I'll keep fighting to rescue one more. We can rest assured with Tebow that this is true because of the words found in Revelation 17, verse 14. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. Only the Lamb can triumph over this tumult of man. John describes Babylon as the mother of prostitutes. The word he uses in the Greek is porne. That's the word from which we get the word pornography. Sexual sin of all sorts run rampant in our world, gripping the hearts and minds of young people and old people alike. Studies suggest that 8% of the world's population suffer from an addiction to pornography. Honestly, I highly doubt it's possible to get an accurate gauge on that number of addiction. But here are a few stats that we can trace. If you visited one porn site per day, it would take you 84 years to view everything that's presently available on the internet. 1 in 3 Americans, either daily or weekly, seek out porn. The porn industry in the United States generated $1.15 billion in 2023, which is equivalent to the total revenue earned by the NCAA. One popular porn site reported more than 100 million visits per day in 2023. And that same website reported 2.14 billion visits during a single month. Now, have you heard of OnlyFans.com or something like that? It's now a site that's been made prevalent. Women say they can earn more money posting illicit photos of themselves online than they can by serving as a teacher or a social worker or something noble. That's an abomination. Gary Wilson says addiction to internet pornography is very real, and it's a phenomenon with very real impact on well-being. It is almost certainly the cause of the widespread sexual dysfunction found in recent studies of late adolescence. And it is a problem that most likely impacts you or your loved ones without you even being aware of it. In other words, sexual addiction is an idol that lures people away from true intimacy. But the beauty of sexuality can be restored from its abuses because of the words from Revelation 17, verse 14. They will wage a war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Don't you know it's so? The Lamb is the only way to triumph over whatever tumult comes upon man. No doubt the culture of Babylon creates a world of degradation. It leads to a place that Psalm 63 verse 1 defines as a dry and thirsty land where there is no water. The city of man promotes debasement where the dignity of people is not upheld. The dignity of people is demeaned. The city of man leads to emptiness where people are never filled, but they are always longing for more. It's never enough. Babylon works hard to sell us on the notion of its allures that it's a very nice city to live in. But its lies lead to self-harm and self-defeat, leads to death. Idols of the world indeed advance deception, and it indeed leads to death. Look at what's advertised before us every day. We all need the newest this, or we all need the newest that. You fill in the blanks. A special pair of expensive pants will they'll make me look slimmer. I just need those pants. If you drink a particular kind of beer, don't you know, guys, that ladies are going to show up in skimpy clothing? Man, I should have started drinking beer a lot earlier, I guess. You know? The city of man sets out to convince us that if we had certain things, if we participated in certain things, we're going to be happy and fulfilled. Consider what we celebrate every day. I mean, we buy into the notion that because individuals can run fast or throw a ball hard, that they're somehow worth $50 million a year. I can't wrap my head around that. Consider that society rewards what it values. The city of man makes idols of athletes, or celebrities, or musical artists, or political figures, and so on. Worldliness is admiring people instead of worshiping God. It's making God small and people big. The great deception of the earthly city is idol worship. That's the primary reason for Babylon's judgment. Babylon is judged because it directs our hearts and our minds away from the glory of God and on to the glory of man. That's what's actually meant by calling Babylon a prostitute 4 times at verses 1, 5, 15, and 16. That's what is meant by Babylon having committed adulteries 3 times, twice in verse 2 and then again in verse 4. Throughout Scripture, we find a connection between sexual adultery and spiritual idolatry. The book of Hosea provides a tremendous portrait of this. And then the word abomination. It's also associated with spiritual idolatry in the Old Testament, especially in the book of Deuteronomy. At least 6 times, abomination is indicated to be a form of spiritual idolatry. John's pastoral responsibility, his job here, if you will, is to prevent the church from turning its focus away from the glory of God, away from the heavenly city, and onto something that looks good and that sounds good, but that's false and unfaithful. And I have to say, the rise of decadence and degradation persists in the city of man because so often it's hard to distinguish many churches from the culture around them. Thomas Schreiner observes, some churches may compromise and accept sexual decadence, while others may put their hope in military might and immoral leaders. Look no farther than the way people prefer a show on Sunday morning than they prefer substance. The pastor and author A.W. Tozer, in addressing the effect of worldliness upon the church and its attendance, once said, "It's scarcely possible in most places to attend a meeting where the only attraction is God." Did you hear what he said? Why do we come to church? To be entertained? Or to be brought into the presence of the glory of God? If it's not the latter, the church is not meeting for the right reasons. And look no farther than how pastors are willing to sacrifice biblical content for increased consumers. Yeah. Don't talk to me about God's wrath. Don't talk to me about sin. Talk to me about the things that Jesus wants me to have. He wants me to have a nice car. He wants me to just be happy all the time. Last I checked, Christ was much more concerned about us being holy than he was about us being happy. The Scottish churchman and poet Horatius Bonner once wrote, "I looked for the church and I found it in the world. I looked for the world and I found it in the church." Remember, Jesus did not pray in John 17:11-18 that his Father would take Christians out of the world. Rather, he prayed that God would take the world out of his disciples. Now, Revelation 17:6 begins, "I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus." And no doubt, the world has always persecuted the church. But Christ instructs us to remain faithful amid even the persecution. But as deadly, literally, as persecution can prove, Christ's high priestly prayer in John 17 demonstrates how Babylon's strategy of worldliness is more dangerous. Many people, many unbelievers, after all, will readily reject the bloodthirsty nature of the world. Only it receives the seductive messages of the world, hook, line, and sinker. Eugene Peterson says, "Whore worship is indulgent and lusty getting, while bride worship is sacrificial and faithful giving. That is why whore worship is such a continuous threat to bride worship." The city of man perpetually deceives, and its deception leads people down the path of perpetual death. There is an oddity in Revelation chapter 17 that I would draw your attention to. It is an oddity that I believe should especially turn humanity's hearts away from the earthly kingdom and onto the heavenly one. Notice who the sovereign God uses to bring final judgment on Babylon. It's the beast from the sea of chapter 13. It's the Antichrist. In Revelation 17:16, John learns that Babylon's far-reaching lures of idolatry will actually collapse at the hand of the evil on whose back it is always ridden. Do you see the oddity? The beast itself destroys the whore. Robert Mounce says, "The wicked are not a happy band of brothers, but precisely because they are wicked, they give way to jealousy and hatred." So I don't believe that the words of John about Babylon should be restricted to one particular location or to one lone city, although in light of the reference to 7 hills in verse 9, he certainly had Rome specifically in mind. But chapter 17 concerns the coming eschatological collapse of civilization in general. The Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, once he comes, having destroyed the various empires of Babylon, is going to gather all of the kings of the earth to himself in order to engage Christ in battle. But in case you've missed a similar refrain from today's message, Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he wins. And not only does he win, we win with him. It says, and with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So I oversimplify here. I oversimplify the text. Revelation chapter 17 is, like other chapters in Revelation, difficult. But this, I believe, is what we are meant to see. The Antichrist does not deliver his followers, he destroys them. The Lord Jesus Christ does not vacate his followers, he vindicates them. Evil ultimately turns in upon itself, whereas Christ's love turns out toward his bride. You might say it's a tale of two kingdoms, one of self-pursuit, wickedness, and death, contrasted with one of redemption, nobility, and goodness. I encourage you today, with all that is within me, to avoid the allures of the city of man and look instead daily to the cross of Christ. To take whatever vain things might charm you most and sacrifice them through his blood. To look to the wondrous cross of Jesus and not at the charms of this world. Church, that is what Christ has called you to as disciples who've been baptized in the love of Jesus. Pray with me. Christ, there are so many things of this world that call out to us. They are sirens. They are lies that would lead us to crash into the rocks and perish. But there you are. There you are on the cross of Calvary. And you invite us to come. Through the victory of your broken body and your shed blood, you invite us to come. Through the victory of your resurrection from the grave, you invite us to come. To the ascension in the right hand of the Father, you invite us to come. That we would come into the city of God today and not perish amid the city of man. This is our prayer. Jesus, be glorified among your people. Amen.